Hey Kyle, thanks for joining me. How you doing today, man?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Oh man, I'm so excited you're here. Got your new book, Fade In. It is phenomenal. It's on the shelves now, and I know you're doing a little bit of a book tour. We got a lot of conversation I want to dive in, but for a lot of my guests, I like to kind of give a little bit of introduction to my listeners and viewers. Why don't you tell us a little bit about, where you're born and raised and kind of how you got into writing, because it's kind of a cool story, and then we'll kind of dive into questions about Fade In.
Yeah, I was raised in Salem, Oregon. My father was an FBI agent, and so we were in Salem, we were in DC, we were in London, but most of my childhood in Salem. And yeah, then moved to Baltimore after college, and now we're in Wyoming half the time and Spain half the time. So we get around for sure. We've kind of lived all over the world. It's been a bit of an adventure. So, which is kind of nice though, because being a writer, you can work from anywhere. It's one of the best things about it. And, you can take all those places and people you meet and shove them into your books.
Well, I mean, you have now, how many books is it?
Something
24,
like 20,
25?
24, 25. I should know that number,
Yeah.
but it's a lot.
After
Too many
20,
to
you can just say
remember.
the fact you're like, "Hey, it's 2 dozen, give or take."
Yeah, it's
Well,
in
I mean,
there.
in a lot of your books, you bring in different characters and places and stories from all over. And let's just dive into that. Fade is a book that you wrote 21 years ago, and phenomenal book. And now, at the very end of it, we kind of thought that was the end of Fade, and it seems like maybe at the point in time you did too. Walk us back into a little bit of history for the book, because there's no spoilers. It's been out for a minute, and talk to us a little bit about Fade, the character in the book, and then where you left him, and then let's jump into Fade In and where you're bringing him back.
So Fade is the nickname of Salam al-Fayed, who's a former SEAL and CIA operative who is a kind of his family were first generation Syrian immigrants. So he worked for the agency. He kind of got screwed over in the end. He got shot. The bullet was lodged in his back. It was slowly, paralyzing him. He wasn't getting they refused to give him the surgery he needed. And then they came back to him and he and wanted him to come back and work for them, basically use him up until he was dead or paralyzed. And this was the first book. He got into it with Homeland Security, really wanted to kill the guy who had tried to bring him back. And it was basically a book that I had written. It was going to be just this rampage by this guy who's actually really funny, kind of dark humor, really philosophical. But his whole thing was, I'm kind of doomed and I'm just going to go out in a blaze of glory. I'm going to try to kill this guy first. And that was the idea that he would go out in a blaze of glory, and he did. And in my mind, he was dead at the end of that book. But I could never stop thinking about him, and my fans continued to send me letters about him and emails. And so I don't know. I just started thinking, I wonder if I could resurrect him. And then one day I came up with an idea that he for how he could have survived.
Well, and it's a fascinating thing too, and I love some of the insight that was left into how he wasn't shot and killed. As far as that, and there again, I don't want to leave any spoilers for those who haven't picked the book up, but there's some great twists there, and bringing them in. So why don't you talk to obviously how he comes to, and he's survived, and what kind of he's set up for in Fade In.
Yeah, poor Fade. He kind of wanted to die. And he's actually been clinically dead multiple times, but he always comes back and he's always really disappointed. So in this one, he wakes up and he's super angry about it. And in the end, though, he is kind of taken in by this group. He's wanted by the police for all his shenanigans the last time. And a group comes in and says, we'll give you a new identity and we'll give you all the rehab and that you need. And at the end of it, we want you to consider coming to work for us. And he really has no choice. At this point, he can't walk, he can't even get out of bed. So, and basically the police are going to descend at any moment and off he's going to go to prison wheelchair. So he does this, but he doesn't really want to take the job. And he finds out that it's a group of billionaires, one in particular, who have decided that the world's really getting crazy and out of control, and we're headed into a ditch. And that governments have become so ineffective or destructive that they really need to get together and try to stop this from happening, try to basically the collapse of society. And it's true if you think about it. The power of these people, the billionaire class, is beyond what it's been since probably the J.P. Morgan days, and so and probably much more so. I mean, they control everything you see, everything you read. They're addicting you to these, to Facebook and all these things, and you can't send a, rocket up without Elon Musk. You can't communicate without his satellites. I mean, in fact, he threatened Donald Trump at one point and said, you're not going to send anything in space. And so these guys have all this power. And my idea was that they would have kind of this guru that would say, making another billion if you already have 200 is kind of a waste of time. Why don't we try to use this a little bit for good? And he's very good at convincing people of things, of giving them what they want, figuring out what they want and giving it to them. Sometimes it's really dark, but he needs them. Sometimes it's less so. And what Fade needed was like a purpose, an identity. Like he's coming back from this coma. He's wanted by the police. He has a new identity and he just doesn't know what to do. And this guy gives him basically something to do. And that is to be the paramilitary wing of this group, because sometimes, there's no substitute for just killing somebody that's in your way. And they realize that.
It and you say that too. Sometimes a loose cannon is your best weapon, right? So, well, and so he's working there with John Lowe, but I wanted to also bring in the character Matt Egan, who has a history with Fade, and he's the person who gets the phone call and kind of steps in at the very beginning of the book. If you can maybe talk a little bit about their relationship again. Yeah, I know we're not going to do all spoilers, but there is a lot of the backstory there that I think is important for readers who may be just picking up this book for the first time.
So they were best friends and worked at the CIA together. They were both have a special forces background and had a pretty significant falling out over the bullet in Fade's spine, and Matt Egan unable to get him help. And Fade actually realizes it wasn't Egan's fault, that he tried and did everything he could, but he's like, I want to hate somebody for this, so I'm choosing you. And in the first book, they really get into it, but Fade finds it's very difficult to kill him. That was his plan, was to kill him, but when he lines up the crosshairs, just can't pull the trigger. And so that continues. Matt Egan is now a bit broken because of events that have happened, and he's kind of the first thing that Fade sees, and Fade sees it again as, you've screwed me over again. I was supposed to be dead, and now here I am laying here virtually, can't move anything, and I'm back. But Matt Egan runs this group. He essentially runs security in air quotes, for this group that I don't know, is sort of trying to gain an enormous amount of power internationally in order to hold things together. And so he doesn't really want Fade back, because Fade's an unpredictable guy. I mean, he doesn't know what he's going to do. I mean, he's not above, chasing a bunch of Xanax with tequila, and he's a little suicidal. So he has an interesting kind of worldview, or like interesting personality quirk, that he's very, very courageous, but it's not really courage, it's indifference. So he'll run straight into the bullets, mostly just because he doesn't care if one hits him.
Yeah.
So so his team, he's extremely good at what he does. He's a legend, a combat legend, but his team's a little skeeved by him because, it's really unpredictable guy to work with.
So when you decided to bring back Fade, when did you make that decision, and what was it like for you on the writing side of things, as far as coming back in? Because it's like it reminds me a little bit, and different story plot too, but like Dexter. I don't know if you're familiar, but the show, like all of a sudden Dexter's dead, and then he's back in. And then all these like 10 years have gone by and people have been like, man, I feel like I want to bring him back. And so I was kind of working with them at the same time and doing some interviews. And I was like, awesome. Another badass character is coming back. And I wondered like, what does that look like from that time of 21 years of, between these books that you decided, when did you decide to bring them back? What was that process like? And maybe just kind of walk me through that, as far as that exchange.
Yeah, so I remember being on a really long trail run in Arizona, and it just popped into my head how he could have survived. But I was working on the Mitch Rapp series. I
Hmm.
did 9 books for that, and I was kind of in the middle of that. And it was an interesting process because I thought, oh yeah, that would be cool. I could bring him back, but what would his story be? So you got to have a story for a character. And at the time, I didn't know. I was really embroiled in the Mitch Rapp stuff. Can't split my attention very well. So I just put it in the back of my head. And I had arced Mitch Rapp into a lot of different things. He started out just in terrorism, but I put him up against domestic terrorists and the Russians and all this. And I really wanted to do this idea that I had that was very much the world is running out of control. Somebody's got to stop this. The politicians have become incredibly destructive and incompetent and frankly old. We're relying on these 90-year-olds to take us into the next, generation. And so or the next era. And you can see I kind of started it in the Mitch Rapp books. If you read those books, there's a guy named Nicholas Ward who's like the first trillionaire, and he becomes very close to Irene Kennedy, the CIA director. And I thought, I'm going to create this sort of shadow group that's going, Mitch Rapp could be their enforcer, because this is really the idea that I wanted to do, I wanted to write about. And I had finished the Mitch Rapp arc that I wanted, that I guess that was the first arc in my mind. I got Mitch Rapp when he was very frustrated and angry. His wife was dead. And I took him all the way to having basically a wife and a daughter, and he was in a much better place. And that was the end of my arc. And I was sort of starting that next arc. And then one day I just realized it was wrong for the series. I thought I am really imposing my style on Vince's series. This is not something Vince necessarily would have written about in my mind. So there was the question. I mean, they didn't mind. Like his family said, oh, that sounds like a cool idea. But it really felt like a takeover. And I didn't really want to do that. Also, I didn't know if Mitch Rapp was the right guy to do this with, because Mitch is always he's like the master of his universe.
Hmm.
And I wanted somebody that could get dragged into it and have sort of these philosophical observations and not be sure if they're doing the right thing. Because, Fade has a moral compass, but he struggles with it because he's not sure. He wants to do the right thing, but he's not sure what it is a lot of times. And neither is John Lowe. And they're gathering power very, very quickly. And even John Lowe's like, I don't think I have the systems in place to control this. It's going better than I thought. And so that was when I decided I was just going to wrap up the Mitch Rapp thing. And it was really a situation with Mitch Rapp that I was either going to commit and write the Mitch Rapp series for the rest of my career and write more than Vince did, or I was going to move on and turn it over to somebody who would have a fresh perspective. And so I decided on the latter.
Well, and that ended up in the hands of Don Bentley,
Mhm.
who, with his first turn at the Mid-Trap series, I interviewed him in Houston at Murder by the Book, which is where you're going to be here very shortly, wrapping up your tour. I know you got a couple dates, Dallas and Houston left. But is that something that when you wrapped that up and you brought that to them, did you have an idea of like who you thought might be interested in taking that over? Was that kind of like, what was that transition like? I was just kind of curious as far as that, you bring up to Vince's family and that, you're going to go ahead and, turn in your last book there in that sense. But what was that like for you? And was that difficult to leave that series? I know you said you kind of came full circle and put them in a different place, but just kind of curious what that was like after so many books under that helm.
Yeah, it was super hard to leave that series. I mean, that's the best job in the world, to be
Yep.
honest with you.
Yep.
Particularly for a guy like me who mostly like sitting in his basement typing, and that, that's what they wanted me to do. So it was great. Well, I'd been a huge fan of the series before that. I mean, and I got to take over one of my heroes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, that was a funny process. So they asked me, who would you think would be really good to take this over? And I gave him a list that did not include Don, but it was because he was literally on the New York Times list at number 2 with the Tom Clancy stuff.
Right.
And I'm like, well, he's not going to leave that, you know? Um, so I didn't suggest it because I thought there was no way. And then coincidentally, he and I were having dinner together not shortly after this. And they had, unbeknownst to me, asked him, if he might be interested in this. And so he's asking me about writing for the series, but it had not been announced that I was leaving. And so I just lied. I'm like, no, no, I'm sticking with it and all this stuff. And he was, I had no idea, but he was freaking out and called his agent first thing the next morning and said, "Oh my God, they're firing Kyle and he doesn't even know." He's like, "I don't want the job. Like, I'm not doing it." And so his agent said, "Let me call." And he called Vince's agent and he said, "No, Kyle can have this as long as he wants," but he quit. And then he called me the next day and like, "You bastard, you lied to me all night."
Well, he told me, he said, like, when I heard the story from his point of view, and he's like, whatever you do, never play poker with Kyle, ever. The guy has an unpenetrable poker face.
I've been lying about that for a long time because it took him a while to find somebody, and
Right, right.
no, I couldn't say anything. So
Sure.
yeah, I'd gotten really practiced at that.
You just pull it into another character in your books, man. That's all. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I lie for a living, I guess, right? But yeah, so it was pretty funny. I was really stoked that he took it because I thought he would be perfect for it. But again, you're number 2 on the list with Tom Clancy. I just didn't think he'd want to do it.
Yeah. No, I think he did a great job. I like how he inserted the book into an era of Mitch's life there too. So, just a fabulous job. And, again, applause to you for all the amazing books you put out with that series. I think, you did Vince and his family proud with that. It was
Well, thank
wonderful
you.
work. Wonderful
Thank
work.
you. Super fun.
Oh, it seems it, man. Great writings. Well, I'm really excited for people to check out Fade In. As far as the last 2 dates of the book tour, if you want to go ahead and plug those real quick, where they'll be.
Yeah, I'll be at Half Price Books in Dallas, and that is tomorrow. And then the next day, I will be at Murder by the Book in Houston. So yeah, if you're in the neighborhood, come and check it out.
Nice. And what is the Dallas one look like? I'm going to be dropping the podcast on the morning of Dallas. So on August 5th here is when this podcast is live. So tonight we'll be in Dallas. What is that one going to be? Do you have in conversation with anybody? You just going to be kind of talking, doing some readings? What does that look like for
That one's with
folks?
David McCluskey,
Oh yeah,
who is
okay.
yeah, like a terrific writer and former CIA guy.
Hmm.
And yeah, so that should be a lot of fun. We're gonna chat a little bit about books. We'll take some questions, sign some books, but it'll be a good time.
Nice. And then in
And
Houston, you'll
then
be kind of doing the
Houston,
same.
it's just me.
Yeah.
Yeah, just me. So you'll have to come and yeah,
Some
put up
Q
with
and
me.
A's and things there too at the audience.
Yeah,
It's always
absolutely.
fun.
Same thing. I'll talk a little bit about the books in the Mitch Rapp series and yeah, take some questions and we'll you know, just have a little chat.
That's fun, and it's really nice to be able to have that time to meet someone and say hello and kind of get some of those questions answered that some of these folks may have with the certain characters and whatnot.
Yeah.
So what's on the future agenda, man? I know you got a move coming up and there's going to be some things happening, but what's on your idea plate for the next book that's coming out?
Yeah, I just recently finished the first draft of the second book in the way I think of it is the second book in the Fade series, but the third book he appears in. So, yeah, it'd probably be out, roughly the same time next year.
And what does this look like for you as far as the process? As a writer myself too, I know that there's, as far as getting into a place, sitting down, writing, like you said, locked in the basement. But what does it look like for you? How many hours you putting in? Is there a certain peak time of the day? What is your process like as a writer?
I'm kind of a 9 to 5er.
Okay.
honestly. It's just because when my wife was working, I just worked when she wasn't here.
Hmm.
So that got to be like a 9 to 5 normal job. Now I can be a little more flexible. If the snow's flying or something, I'll go skiing and work the weekend or something. So I work really hard on bad weather days and not as hard on good ones. So it's I've gotten better at it. I'm better at figuring out where I'm at and if I'm going to meet my deadline. So, if I'm ahead, might take some time off. And so that's one of the great things about writing is the flexibility of it.
Yeah. Now, when you finished this book, were you already having that arc of that next, book, or did you kind of sit back and, absorb where that was and think, okay, where can I take them next? Because I know it took you a little bit of time from fade to fade in. Obviously, not that much of a turnaround time the next go around, but do you have an arc in a series where you're like, man, this is going to be multiple 3, 4, 5 book kind of thing? Is this something that I mean, I don't want to give anything away there, but I'm just kind of curious as far as that, are you bringing this also with some of the current climate and things that are going on? Because obviously you brought that too in that kind of fiction, faction kind of, half and half world. Just kind of curious about that. Or do you let some of the events of what's going on, kind of influence maybe where you're going to be taking Fade?
I mean, the general concept of the world kind of getting a little crazy is what I want to talk about in this series. But in a way, it also makes it really hard to plan too specifically ahead. So, I mean, it's, for instance, Russia being a good example. I wrote a Mitch Rapp book once about Russia invading Ukraine. So, but thank God it was a few years before it happened. And that was such a weird thing for Putin to do that when I wrote the book, I really wanted to write that book, but it seemed so stupid and crazy that no one would do it. So I gave the Putin character a brain tumor, and he was afraid he was going to weaken and all the people around him were going to kill him and try to take over, right? But because there was no way this was going to be good for Russia, it was going to be a disaster. I did a bunch of research on it. There's no way. People have always overestimated their military capability by like 5 times. So, and this is the kind of thing, or Hamas. I mean, talk about the biggest tactical error of the modern, era. You can't predict what's going on. And the other is technology. When I started this book, when I started writing it, AI really wasn't a thing.
Hmm.
Like that's how fast.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, now it's taking over, right? What is that span of a year and a half or something? So takes a long time to write a book. So you have to really think about what's the next year look like. And that's incredibly hard. I wish I wrote thrillers in like 1650 because, it was going to be exactly the same. 50 years from now, 1700 is going to be exactly the same as 1650. Now, next month, it could be completely different than this month. So it's a challenge.
I can imagine. I was kind of curious if you had anything that you wanted to reach out and to say to some of your fans, supporters and followers that have been out there. Obviously you have quite a distinguished career, and just curious what you might want to say to them.
Yeah, I want to thank them. I mean, particularly all the Mitch Rapp fans who have stuck with me, who are really excited about a new character in a new series. It was really hard to know how those fans were going to react first to when I took over, because I thought, oh man, the hate mail is going to pour in, or it maybe. I mean, I had no idea.
Sure.
And that didn't happen, fortunately. And then there was the side of, oh, I'm leaving the Mitch Rapp series, and people really liked the books, but maybe that was it. They didn't care about me one way or another. It was just the Mitch Rapp stuff, and that also hasn't happened. And people have been really excited to, go on a little bit of a different journey. So I really appreciate that, giving me a chance both
Nice.
times.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I was also thinking in line with that, legacy is something that I often think about and talk about with a lot of my guests. And obviously, 24, 25 books here under your belt. You've #1 New York Times best-selling author. There's so many things that you have left in print for those to be able to see as, a legacy of your writing. But, I was also curious as far as how you view your legacy on a personal setting and as well as that professional as a writer too. Is that something you think about? And what is it that, go when someone mentions legacy, and how do you kind of embrace that?
I like to think that I wrote books that made you make a reader think about things from a different perspective. I've always been really interested in the gray between the black and white. You don't notice that as much with the Mitch Rapp stuff because I was writing very much in Vince's, style.
Hmm.
And he was more of a good versus evil guy. So, but I want people to learn things. I want people to see something that they thought they knew for sure. And then at the end of the book, think, wow, maybe I wasn't thinking that through fully. And that's what I find interesting about books. And I've been very lucky to be able to write the books that interested me. I think a lot of writers get into series, they become to some extent victims of their own success. It's hard to have a huge series, your number one New York Times bestseller, and then tell your editor, I think I'm just moving on. I want to do something different. I want to write romance. So I think I have done that. Like, there aren't that many writers that have just been like, I'm going to go over here, and then I'm really interested in this concept, and I'm interested in this concept, and I'm going to write thrillers, but they're going to be built around different types of characters. Sometimes they're men, sometimes they're women. I've written in the first person. I've done all these things because I think, what's the cool thing going on in the world now that I want to explore? And then I build that book around it. Similar to what we were talking about with Fade of
Yeah.
I thought, oh, I can bring him back, but what's the story he's perfect to tell. And I found that story. But if I hadn't, he would have never come back.
Well, no, it's a great vehicle for that too. I like how you've been able to really dive into what interests you, because I think when you have that passion, it comes through. And I find the writing is always better as opposed to, like you said, being a victim of your own circumstance.
Yeah. And then you can do something new, which is always, it's hard. Like, once you write, for instance, 9 Mitch Rapp books, you start writing an action sequence or something, you start thinking, have I written this before? Like, my play, you have to go back and try to figure out, I think I've done this. There's something too familiar about this scene. And that happens to all of us. Now that definitely, you get a bunch of thriller writers together drinking, who have written a lot of books, and that always comes up. You're like, oh man, I realized I'd written that scene before, I'd throw it away.
I would love to be at that circle and just hearing all of you guys talk about, like, dang it, yes, back in this day I did that one, this, I repeated it or whatever,
Yeah.
or the struggles of doing that, because it's great. I mean, it's a good point there too, and I know that kind of your background and being close, your father being in the position he was, you've been influenced and been around a lot of things, and I was also curious, like, as far as is in this book and Fade In, was there any type of research, any place that this book took you, or is there any type of people that you spoke with as far as kind of to getting your head around this and kind of doing that research? What did that look like?
For this one, it was much more science than, because it's an unconventional group. So it's not the CIA, it's not the
Mhm.
military. My big one that I can't do at all is guns, which is funny because my father was a FBI firearms instructor for a while. But it's just not something I know anything about. It's super complicated, and people are really tuned into it.
Yeah, they
Like,
are.
you do not want to make a mistake on that. In my first novel, this would have been 30 years ago, I made a couple of mistakes about guns. This was before the internet. And my dad read it and he didn't say anything,
What? Thanks,
which,
Dad.
truth be told, my father wasn't a gun guy either. I mean, he carried one for work, but
Sure.
when he retired, he put it in a box and like
Right.
stuck it in the attic. So, um, but yeah, I think, yeah, I called shotgun shells bullets, I think. But it's funny is like, even back then it was so hard to research stuff. And I used to get a lot of mail from prison, um, because I had some guy smoking crack out of a plastic pipe, and it turns out that would melt. But I was thinking like a bong, right? And I'd get these letters. They're from prison when they're done in pencil.
Uh-huh.
And so, and I know they're going to be like, I have it on very good authority that you can't smoke crack out of a plastic pipe. So it's much easier now. Like I used to have to lean on. I mean, that was one of the reasons, honestly, I started writing thrillers is because I thought I wanted to write a book, and I thought I loved all kinds of books. I'd been a huge reader in all these different genres. I still am, and I thought, wow, it'd be really easy to research because I know all these people. I've known them since I was a little kid. And sure enough, you just get on the phone.
Yeah.
Um, Now you can just, you know,
Yeah. No more visits to prisons to interview
boom.
folks on. Yeah.
No. The problem now, though, and this is brand new, we were just talking about AI,
Uh-huh.
is the information's getting worse. So it seems very convincing. But you have to, it's almost more time consuming now because you have to double check and triple check everything from multiple sources. And I noticed this recently so I live in a town in Spain called Granada,
Hmm.
and it's a very, very beautiful town. It's white, like houses and hills and an Arab fort. And I get a lot of stuff in my news feed about Granada because, I live there.
Right.
And they have these beautiful pictures of Granada on the article, and I'd be looking at it, and I'd ask my wife, like, where was that picture taken? And she's like, nowhere. That's not Granada. And what it is people using AI so they don't have to pay for a photo.
Right. Right.
They're
Copyright
like,
image or something.
create an image of Granada. And it's so real that even I look at it and I'm trying to think, what vantage point like would you go to? Where's this church on a cliff? Like, and that's everything now. You look at it and you're like, wow, this seems very, very credible. And then you think, just there's something about it just doesn't smell quite right. So I think it's going to be a situation where now it comes full circle and I have to call friends at the CIA again.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it totally, man. And that is something that it's going to be indistinguishable at some point in time. And there's ads and things you look at now and you're like, wait, is that a real person or not? Like,
Yeah.
and you can kind of, there are some tells, but that's just, first, two, third, fourth generation of that. And a year from
Yeah.
now, like we talked about, what can happen between the months? What can happen in 12 of those? What's that going to look like?
Yeah. I mean, you used to be able to trust video.
Nope.
Now you can't at all.
Nope.
So it's yeah, it's going to be an interesting challenge to try to not make those kinds of errors. The world is very complicated, and just like I can't trust the photo that comes up on Google.
Yep. Well, I guess, before we leave out this, a couple more questions here, but this one just popped in my mind is the idea of AI and in a writer's format. Like, there's a lot of people can spit out a book. Now, obviously, it's not going to be, human quality, right? But we are kind of on an edge of things too, where I know a lot of people can maybe use this for tools, maybe helping them in some way. I know podcasters that use it as they're kind of setting up for interviews and stuff. So there's a lot of different usage where it can be a tool in the toolbox. But I was just curious about your take as far as either in a sense of a tool in the toolbox or how you see that and how that may change or affect writing and maybe even in your genre and with you and your peers.
I think it's going to be on like a seismic shift. I don't use AI other than my wife uses it to like generate pictures or
Mhm.
something, but I don't use it. I tried it once and I thought I'm going to take a rough draft, my first draft of a chapter, and I'm going to put it in AI and say rewrite this into a final in the style of Kyle Mills. And it cleaned it up. I mean, it's nothing I would have written. And for me, writing the books is the fun part. So like I don't just want to churn them like that. It's not of any interest to me at all.
Right.
Takes out the fun part of my job, right?
Sure.
And but I think this is going to be the future. I mean, it's going to get really good at this, and I also think, and here's a piece of wild speculation. One thing I've noticed, and I'm getting to the point here, over the 30 years that I've been writing is people in the beginning were much more tolerant of what we were talking about earlier, different perspectives, learning something new, learning something maybe they disagreed with, right? Um, Now people are really sensitive to that, and they're going to label you, even if it's a character that's the bad guy. You're like, well, that guy's a serial killer. I don't agree. I'm not agreeing with him. He's like a character. So I think the way I see this in the future is custom books. And that's what I think is going to happen. That like you write a Mitch Rapp book and then people can order it, but they have sliders and they're like, "Oh yeah, I want more hot sex, but I don't like swearing and I want, this and I want it to be set in this town and my hometown. Oh, and I want to be a major character in it." And then you'll get that book will be just for you. And I suspect that is going to happen because that's what's happening on the internet, right? People get funneled in by these algorithms. It's incredible to me because I read and study news from all kinds of different sources, including crazy conspiracy people, because they'll give you great ideas, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so I'm just all the far left, the far right, the complete tinfoil hat people. I get it from everywhere. And I'm always amazed sometimes when I talk to somebody who's from one app perspective or another, how much they don't know. Because not only sometimes you're being spun to, if something bad happens to say your politician gets caught, I don't know, taking a bribe or something, they just won't report it. So you're just missing that data point, and people will say, "Well, what are you talking about, Kyle? What are you talking? Like it happened yesterday." And so, as people become more and more dialed into never hearing anything from anybody that disagrees with them, and everything confirming their own biases, it becomes harder and harder to read a book that maybe, for instance, I once wrote a Mitch Rapp book that I had an Iranian terrorist. And he was kind of going off on America, like yelling about why he became this Iranian terrorist. And his editor said, "You got to take this out, man. You're scoring a lot of points against the United States." But I thought, but this is interesting, right? The Iranians don't like us. Why? Well, we overthrew their government and stuck in a brutal dictator. We supported Saddam Hussein in a nasty war against them, et cetera, et cetera. We shot down one of their passenger airliners and basically told them to go stick it. And so she's like, "Well, you can't have that in there because it'll make people uncomfortable." But to me, that's the interesting stuff of books, right?
Yeah.
I hate the terrorist that's just like, "I hate America because I hate America," right? Like, why not give them some reasons, a motivation, a personality, all these things, and then maybe you learn something from
Well,
it.
it's a piece of history, right? I mean, there is a
Yeah.
reason why certain people feel this way if they're from this area, they're from this viewpoint, or they grew up with this kind of circumstance, and all you're doing is really just embedding the real truth of that character. Whether
Yeah.
somebody, it's not like you're anti-US, but you are showing a character that is this reason why they feel this way, justified or not. That is just basically coloring in that sketch of who that person is.
Yeah, it's like writing a serial killer, which I did once, and I'll never do again. But you had to think about it. Why does this guy feel justified in doing this? Why does he think it's okay? Is he just insane? Has he backed into a reason? Whatever. So that to me, I find really interesting. But as I've said, I think Vince's editor was right because I was doing something I would have written, not necessarily what Vince would have written.
Right, right.
And I think that's become more and more every year that if you write a character who's, I don't know, in this case, anti-American or maybe he's anti-Christian or something, and you give them a backstory as to, it might be like, "Why do you hate America?" "Well, you blew up my mom," right? Could have happened. We blow a lot of stuff up. Well, that'd make you mad, right? I mean, I remember when my dad used to work with IRA, the Irish Republican Army, and they would come here to hide out after they did something. So you'd have to chase them back to the United States and all this stuff. But I thought, if the British had bombed the bar they were in and killed 50 Americans, but said, there was a terrorist in there, we'd have said, "Yeah, but you blew up my mom." Maybe it's justified, bad terrorist, but that could make you angry. And I don't know, I find those kinds of motivations interesting, but sometimes they're hard to read.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, no, well said. And, I know you got a lot of other things going on. You got a flight tomorrow there. I'm excited you're coming to Texas. Can't wait to hear all about that. And for those who might want to follow with any future book tours or any information and news, I'd love for you to kind of plug where they can go and find these things and maybe plug your socials. So, those who are ready to follow in, maybe have some questions for you after this, how they can go about that.
Yeah, just so it's Kyle Mills author, and that's X, Facebook, and Instagram. I've not delved into TikTok yet. Um, and my website is kylemills.com. And so yeah, check it out. I answer all my stuff. So or you can email me also through the website if you want to get in touch.
Absolutely. Well, everyone, make sure you go check out Fade In. This is a phenomenal book. You've put out some great work. Thank you so much for sharing your talents, Kyle. And yeah, thank you for joining me today. I look forward to having you on again sometime.
Yeah, I hope so. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, man. You have a good day.
You too.
Cheers.